Merci à tous, et spécialement à Gloria, Claire et Ophélie. Je suis tellement ravie d'être ici. Mais je vais parler en anglais. OK. OK. Little higher. Yeah, ça va? OK, le premier, s'il vous plaît. Oh, c'est moi. OK. Voilà. A true revelation in the current show is the sheer diversity and inventiveness of the ceramic works produced by Gauguin. I think we've not understood before now how inventive he was in this particular medium. Gauguin l'Alchimiste offers us 23 ceramics made before his departure for Tahiti in 1891. This slide is just a sampling of the remarkable stoneware. Gauguin's paintings or prints can appear to constitute discrete worlds unto themselves, but the current show weaves provocatively back and forth across media, revealing the 1880s to be a period of intense exploration and experimentation. Early on, Gauguin made conventional portraits in wax and marble, but it's wood where he found the most enduring satisfactions. Here are only some of the works made prior to 1891, and at the far right, Pape Moe. Let's see, I think this is a little, there we go. This is done after he returns to Paris, also of oak. While in Europe, he worked with oak, pine, walnut, laurel, and pear woods. He especially liked oak, not hard to get, and a surface that could easily take color. In 1891, he left the world of pine and oak for the Pacific. He also left behind the option of working in ceramics to take it up again when he returned to Paris. This talk considers the ways in which the trees and their woods of Tahiti inspired him in a crucial material vocabulary for his art in the atelier tropique. I want to start with two very simple observations. The first is that Tahiti is an island whose dense interior was as interesting as its shores. While one might first think of the turquoise lagoons, it's also a mountainous, volcanic island with high peaks, deep valleys, and densely forested land. So forests are as characteristic of Tahiti as the empty beach or the open sea. And then a second basic observation is that by 1891, Gauguin was, simply put, seeking difference from Paris. His goal was to live in a radically different milieu and to produce a radically different art. His paintings from this period, as we well know, are executed in pigments that he brought with him or imported from France. But it was in working with wood he could physically engage with the material world of the island, letting the material itself, as much or more so than imagery and iconography, stand as testimony to the natural world of Tahiti. Using tropical woods was not just a matter of convenience or finding inexpensive materials, though these pragmatic concerns played some role. With carvings in wood, he could bring his encounter with Polynesia directly, physically, to his viewers. The material offered a simple proof of his voyage, a souvenir of having worked out there. Through the fictionalized diary Noix Noix, which of course was edited and contributed to by Charles Maurice, there's much evidence of his appreciation of the forest. One example, c'est à la nature qu'il faut s'adresser pour vivre, et elle est riche, elle est généreuse, elle ne refuse rien à qui va lui demander sa part des trésors qu'elle garde sur les arbres. His passion for the botanical diversity of Tahiti shapes the account of his hike into the forest with his Tahitian friend to find wood for his carvings. He walks through a mad vegetation that grows ever wilder as they enter the interior. Un sableau de chemin parmi des arbres pêle-mêle, arbres à pin, arbres de feur, pandanus, boraos, cocotiers, fougères monstrueuses, toute une végétation folle. He cites here with precision the types of trees, evidencing an awe for this botanical sphere, laying out for the reader an exotic repertoire largely unknown in Europe. Perhaps the most obvious tree he might associate with Tahiti was the ubiquitous palm tree and its fruits of coconuts scattered on the beaches. Certainly the palm was a common trope in the descriptions figuring prominently in such literary sources as the Mariage de Loti. But as an obvious icon of the tropics, this could not hold his attention. He'd already painted the Caribbean. The palm trees and its fruits were just perhaps too common, and the wood uninteresting. Coconut and shells inspired just two carvings that survive. One with a few modest surface decorations on the right, that's in a private collection in Tahiti, and the other on the left, a very amusing little shell carved as a fish, decorated with mother of pearl and seed eyes. And I think the one on the left is very kitschy and maybe suspicious to the contemporary eye, but there's a signature and a strong early provenance that at least led Christopher Gray to regard it as authentic. In any case, his interest in the coconut shell was slight, because as a material, it lacked luster, it lacked volume, and it lacked rarity. What did clearly engage his imagination was pua, or, as it's known in Tahiti sometimes, pua noa noa. The pua flowers appear year-round in Tahiti. Its long tubular blossoms are lovely and fragrant, and were one of the most favorite flowers along with tiare for weaving into garlands. The wood's of a medium weight, a medium hardness, makes it very appropriate for furniture and small crafts. It was very fragrant when cut. It takes polish easily, and these are both characteristics that would have greatly appealed to Gauguin. As Peter Zegers has noted in the superb online scholarly catalog of Gauguin, and this is online at the Art Institute's website, Gauguin prominently included branches of this plant as a motif here and here, embracing the title page of Noa Noa. The buds on the verge of flowering announce an association of this place with sheer fragrance, which combined with our visual sight of the print, our understanding of the touch of his hand in carving or printing, offers us a multisensorial experience. But seems logical we should also consider the fragrances associated with the actual woods that he carved. In particular, the tree's name, Pua Noa Noa, suggests that the fragrant tree, its flowers, and its woods could well be another source from which he drew the central idea, Noa Noa, for his journal and the suite of prints. Gauguin carved many artworks of Pua on this first trip. The sculpture Tahura, which is not necessarily a portrait, but conjures the presence of his partner Tea Hamana. The sculpture associates women, Tahiti, youth, and fragrance, linking the wood, the body, and the flower. The full blossom at her ear is not carved in detail, but it resembles the larger, less pointy blossoms of the pua, rather than the quite common tiare. Pua blossoms, in addition to tiare, were also used in this era to scent the oils that Tahitian women used on their bodies and their hair, and thus the flower invokes both feminine sensuality and intimacy. And the gilding, the gold color on the flower, draws our eye to the source of the fragrance, carved in a wood that until it dried had its own distinctive floral fragrance. This was, in short, a sculpture that fused the senses of touch, sight, and smell, evoking an experience of synesthesia valued in his symbolist circles. Pua wood inspired Gauguin with its compelling yet workable materiality. Its force as a material is evident in this cylinder, in which the bend of the original trunk shapes and compresses the forms of the back-to-back figures. One figure arches, the other compresses to fit into the interior of the bend. These figures may reference gods, and indeed Tahitian mythology holds that the god Tane brought the first Pua samplings to earth. But the impact of the work comes first from its form, not iconography, from the artist's encounter with a bent branch, one that bends the artist's conception to its form, not the other way around. We should acknowledge that Gauguin, raised in a Catholic milieu, had a long experience of Christian wood carving in Europe, and he knew very well the long folk traditions of carving in Brittany. The crucifixes of chapels such as Tremolo offer what we might think of as Breton ti'i, icons hung in reverence and consulted by those in search of spiritual presence and spiritual comfort. Wood as a medium could embody the spiritual for Gauguin. Two of the Tahitian woods he utilized, toa and tamanu, held a special place in Tahitian religion, as both were often planted to provide shade and isolation at the marae, which are the stone altar platforms from traditional culture used for religious rites and sacrifices. In the book, he often consulted on this first trip about ancient culture in Tahiti, or pre-Europeanized culture, which was Travels to the Islands of the Pacific, written in 1837 by a diplomat, ethnographer, voyager, Jacques-Antoine Morinhout. We read that the leaves of the toa tree, also called aito, were, quote, stirred by the wind. They produced a strong whistling, which the Tahitians attributed to the gods, end quote. While the trees grew wild across the land, those planted intentionally next to the marae gained spiritual power, providing resting places for spirits as they gather at the marae. Moreover, it's likely Gauguin visited some of these sites because in this era, remnants of at least 5 major marae existed along the southern coast, near where he lived in Matarea, and there were several left up in the valleys as well. So without attributing to Gauguin any literal desire to recreate ancient cultural practices, it seems probable that he would have at least generally understood these woods as belonging to a sacred realm in the older Tahiti that he regarded as both precious and vanishing. Indeed, his most significant painting of a marae, this canvas of 1892, hides the site of religious observance just over the crest of the empty hill, where a made-up te'e presides, and a wisp of smoke right here suggests the fire or a rite in progress. What is visible to us is the frame of the trees at the side, and including one at the far right that's animated by a face and a spirit that seems to come alive with the ritual itself. As Morinhout noted, even as early as 1837, it was by then only the majestic trees at the sites of the marae that, quote, have survived the demolition of the antique temples, end quote, after the arrival of Christianity. By Gauguin's time of the 1890s, it was surely more the trees than the modern Tahitians themselves who were the remaining witnesses of the sacred practices. Toa, or ironwood, or bois de feu, are large, imposing trees with very hard wood. When planted near the marae, they are denoting boundaries of a sacred precinct. In mythology, these trees were created by the bodies of fallen warriors after battle. Their blood becomes the sap, their hair becomes the leaves. As recounted in Morinhout, this tree was sacred to the war god Oro, and the wood was used in weapons and te'e that honored him. As per 19th century dictionaries, the very word toa means not only the tree, but denotes a warrior or a courageous and valiant man. Gauguin could well have absorbed these connotations from his reading or his general familiarity with the culture. The wood is tough to work, but for Gauguin, it's worth the pain. As he wrote to de Montfred, j'ai rapporté un morceau de bois de feu qui m'a usé les doigts, mais j'en suis content. Idle with the shell, his major work in toa, wood from this trip, is a deity, but no literal representation of Oro. Some scholars have identified it as the creator god Ta'aroa, and while that's plausible, I think Gauguin intended a specific iconographic identification to remain at best elusive. His target audience, after all, was an avant-garde who wouldn't know any of these deities. Matters of identity aside, it's an imposing god. In spite of the Buddha-like pose, it's ferocious in details of both the tattoos on his legs, the bared teeth, which are taken from the inner throat of a parrotfish. And then a shining shell tops the piece, both as a nimbus to suggest that it is a god, but also a prize object of beauty taken from the lagoon. The shell and the fish teeth laid into the toa wood invoke a symbiosis poised between the worlds of sea and forest, that nurtures the humans on the island, an interdependence that is essential in Tahitian thought and religion. The other tree sacred to the Marae, but much easier to carve, is the tamanu, or the Alexandria laurel. These trees are broadly planted now for shade and ornamental purposes. It's too slow growing to be used for lumber. But in the 19th century, it provided wood for everything, from canoes to daily objects to wood carvings. For Gauguin, this was clearly a wood of choice for most of his figures that he called either his bibelots sauvages, or once on display at the Durand-Ruel Gallery here in 1893, he called them his ti'i. Scholars have made proposals about which different Tahitian gods they represent, but rather than take those up here, I want simply to stress that this important body of work, one that he regarded as central to his Tahitian career, was carved from a wood that was widely recognized as having been sacred to the precincts of the Marae and the island. The wood could conjure for him the old Tahiti he so wished to know. Yet unlike the very hard toa, tamanu offered great versatility to the sculptor. Early on, he carved these functional objects made of tamanu, such as the poi poi bowl that's in the exhibition. These objects came to him fashioned, ready to use, and then he approached them as empty surfaces that invited him to apply decorative patterns, and that was especially true right after his arrival. He could use this same wood then to elevate a quotidian object like a platter to a work of art, or to craft a fantastic deity. He also found inspiration not just in these woods, but in a substance of the tree bark, itself a material long used in Tahiti to make a fiber cloth, known through Polynesia as tapa, or ahu in Tahiti. In Tahiti, the fiber cloth was made from beating out the thin layers of an inner bark of the brusonetia, which is the paper mulberry tree, or also occasionally from breadfruit trees. This fabric had for generations been used for making clothing and precious mats. Gauguin experimented in a limited way with sheets of tapa in these works, especially as covers for albums and portfolios of drawings, his document of encounter with his Tahitian world. For both his manuscript compilation of passages about ancient Tahitian life, the Ancien Culte Maori, and the cover for Cahiers pour Aline, tapa was a basic material of choice, which he then went on to decorate and elaborate with watercolor, gouache, and ink. This portfolio cover, Chez les Maori, is in the show. The vibrant, pulsating form on the back is a sea urchin, which invokes both the beauty and the grotesque oddities of sea life. And the tapa is a gift of the rich forests, and together sea and forest announce the partnership that sustains the island ecosystem. Traces of the fabrication of making tapa appear, as noted by conservators Harriet Stratus, who's here today, and Kristen Lister in the Chicago online catalog. Again, an excellent source for you all to consult. And in the right background of a painting of 1896, they point to this area where those long strips of tapa are laid out to dry. But I suggest that this is more a kind of evocation of a traditional past, not evidence of the present. Fin de siècle Tahiti no longer actively produced tapa. By the 1860s, it had largely been replaced with imported print and cottons of the sort you see in the Dallas canvas on the right, in the Piraeus skirts. I'm indebted to Dr. Andrew Mills of the Center for Textile Conservation and Technical Art History at the University of Glasgow, who's currently researching Pacific tapas. He reports that while the active production of tapa was gone by the 1890s, a great deal of older tapa was still circulating in substantial amounts, as regional chiefs, and there were many of them throughout the century, had been amassing large quantities, and families still hoarded it, keeping it away from most of the French, hoarded it as a form of status and wealth. It's most likely it's from this stash of old fabric, old tapa, that Gauguin could have acquired these sheets for his album covers. And the material thus carried a valence as antique, authentically Pacific, as opposed to that modern European cotton. Again, turning to Morenhout, as Gauguin did, we find two interesting facts about tapa. One, that by 1837, it was already declining. And this is something that Morenhout emphatically described as his words, a past industry, rather than as an industry still active today, 1837. Second, we find the production of tapa was the result of community effort and not that of a single artisan. And it thus represented the artistic life of an entire village, an entire culture. Morenhout praised it in idyllic terms as evidence of a fabled golden age. Thus, Gauguin's use of tapa sheets embodied not just the forests, but also a notion of pre-modern time, representing older Tahiti with its practices he strove to encounter, but he felt had escaped him. Thus, for him, it allowed him to enact a Tahiti of his historical imagination. Gauguin's passion for exotic woods extends to the end of his career. The Maison de Jouir, in some ways, is a large living sculpture, a studio home with a doorway made from scavenged sequoia planks from California, but we'll learn more about it tomorrow from Carolyn Boyle Turner. In conclusion, what difference should we think it makes which trees Gauguin uses for the materials of his sculpture? Is the rich array of woods just a circumstance that would benefit any artist who moved to Polynesia? I would say both yes and no. Certainly, Gauguin was pragmatic in making the most of what he could find, and he went to Tahiti expecting exotic flora and fauna, along with artistic rejuvenation. But I think these materials hold dual values for him, as raw materials that invite fresh physical and sensorial engagement, and as specific types of vegetation that held an accrued cultural meaning, given the role these trees had long played in Tahitian society. So to be clear, I'm hardly arguing that Gauguin was a self-trained botanist or a historical ethnographer a la Morenhout. Rather, I think of him as a kind of poet of place who gave new meaning to specific physical materials. Indeed, as this exhibition so eloquently claims, he was an alchemist of his times. It may also be useful here to think of his relationship to the Tahitian language. His knowledge of it was partial and incomplete, to be sure, but he nonetheless made Tahitian words part of his repertoire, incorporating them as titles, as words on canvas or in print, to both mystify the viewer and to express himself in the face of a world he partly experienced and, as we know, partly invented through dream and memory. As the scholar from Papeete, Hiriata Mio, has reminded us in the catalog Ia Orana Gauguin from 2004, he clearly understood Tahiti well enough, and Tahitian well enough as a language, to reference key concepts and cultural practices he encountered. The tropical woods he carved are the material counterparts to those Tahitian words and phrases, and we see the same artistic intelligence hard at work, making thoughtful, intentional choices of his materials as he adopted them both to fire his imagination and to facilitate his art. Thank you.